Thanks everybody for coming this evening. My name is Matthew Altringham. I'm editor of the BBC College of Journalism's website. I've spent myself about 15-16 years at the BBC in a number of different roles, and have at times enjoyed, courtesy of the BBC, some quite interesting foreign trips. None I think is as interesting as some of the guys around me this evening, but I do remember one occasion travelling to Colombia with Bridget Kendall. We were going out to interview the president and also a couple of drugs barons who were at the time pretending to be upholders of democracy and fighting the Marxist, fighting against the Marxist FARC in the south. We arrived deep in the heart of northern Colombia, just me and Bridget and a cameraman, and found our way to this drugs baron's ranch. Walked past rows of stony-faced men in dark glasses. Feeling slightly nervous, we walked into this guy's room, and on his desk was a picture of a former colleague who'd met an unfortunate accident earlier in the week. So things were going terribly well, and I was, feeling reasonably comfortable and confident. My BBC pass was sitting comfortably in my pocket. And the interview was going very well until Bridget started asking him, suggesting to him that in fact he wasn't really a defender of democracy, he was really a drugs baron, and was wondering just quite how much involvement he'd had in his friend's mishap earlier in the week. Now, I felt reasonably secure and reasonably protected in that environment because I was there under the BBC's flag. The BBC knew I was there, the British government knew I was there, the Colombian government knew I was there. So, I was pretty sure that nothing was going to come, no harm was going to come to me, even though at the time the circumstances were a little interesting, let's put it that way. But some of the guys around me, these guys around me here tonight, have had far more dramatic experiences, and I think will open up some interesting conversation. I think what we're hoping to do this evening is really just have a conversation, just talk about the issues that trying to go alone as a foreign correspondent have raised, how it works, how it doesn't work, and some of the problems and practical issues that you might face. So on my right here, we've got Ben de Peer, who's head of foreign news at Channel 4, and has worked in the field for a considerable period of time, reporting from Sri Lanka, among many other places, and will present. We'll be able to offer a perspective from mainstream media's view. Kitty Logan here has worked as a freelance independent journalist since 2002, when you started in Kabul, and I think your experience will be quite revealing to many of us here this evening. On my left is Rosie Garthwaite, who's the author of this fine tome, £12.99 in all good bookshops, How to Avoid Being Killed in a War Zone, which is a compilation really of good advice and tips on how to operate as a freelancer in some of these difficult environments. And on my left here, Vaughan Smith, who doesn't really need an introduction, who's I think probably the eminence grise of freelance foreign reporting, and will add his thoughts as well. So I'd like to start with a 15-minute, short film from Graham Holliday, who I know very well, is based in Kigali, and has put together a film. He's back in Kigali now, although he was around in London last week. He's back in Kigali, and he's put together a short film highlighting what he would have said were he able to be with you here today.
Hi there. Thanks for coming. Sorry I can't be there. I was in London late last week, but I had to head back to Rwanda. Hence this slightly strange presentation where I'm talking into a computer screen trying to imagine, 40, 50, 100 people or so at the Frontline Club. So just to help you along a little bit, excuse all my transitions as well, by the way. That's me, photographed by my friend Hez Holland from Reuters in Rwanda last year during the presidential election. That's just to help give you a face to the voice you're going to hear for the next 15 minutes or so. So yes, live in Rwanda, moved there just about 2 years ago or so. I lived in France for 3 years previously, 10 years in Vietnam before that, and lived in South Korea before that. For about 6 years or 8 years or so in Vietnam, I worked as a full-time freelancer, and I'll be talking a little bit about that experience in this presentation, and then the second half of the presentation I'll be focusing on what I've been doing in Rwanda for the last 2 years, and slightly different ways of working since I've moved to Rwanda. So that's my desk in Rwanda. I replaced a dining room table in the south of France for a dining room table in central Rwanda. It's not very exotic, made of eucalyptus, but that's about as much equipment as I need to work, just a laptop, a pen and a bit of paper. But that's where I work most mornings in Kigali if I'm not out and about doing something else. However, a long time ago, things were quite different. I work in a completely different way to the way I work these days. When I was starting out, I was constantly pitching, and that's the first part of this presentation. I just want to look at how the whole pitching process works, and I don't think it's changed that much. I've never worked as a wire reporter, never worked for AP, Reuters, AFP, any of those. I've only ever worked in features, blogging, and as a columnist as well. So the first thing to do, if you want to set out and be a solo foreign correspondent somewhere, is to start meeting people. Start meeting editors. Go and meet them, bring them ideas. Don't go empty-handed with a pretty face. You've got to go with stuff they want. You go with ideas, they're gonna listen to you, they're gonna be interested in you, but make sure your ideas are good. If they're not good, maybe they're not gonna follow up with you. But make the point while you're in the country with editors who are going to buy stuff to go and actually meet them. On top of that, one thing I did that was very useful back in the day was go to this website, Paperboy. This website lists all the newspapers all around the world, and you can very quickly search on newspapers to find out what is available in a region, go to the websites, find out the editors you need to contact of the sections you're interested in pitching, and get in touch. Again, do all this before you go. Build up a database of contacts. The more contacts you have, the more work you potentially get, of course. So once you've done that, once you've got your database, and once you're actually out in the field somewhere, you're going to have to start pitching and fishing. You're going to have to start fishing for stories first. Without stories, you can't pitch anything. But you're going to have to become a bit of a pitching machine. I think I was pitching, nearly every other day when I lived in Vietnam. It's a constant battle to get stories, and you've got to get stories, otherwise you simply can't make a living. So, say you've got a pitch, say you've got a commission. For example, you've got a commission from BBC Wildlife magazine. I used to do quite a lot of work with them back in the day, and you've got one pitch, and you're going to go and do a story on a rare breed of dolphin in eastern Cambodia, as I did once upon a time. That one pitch isn't going to pay for your trip. It's not going to pay for the hotel, the transport, the visas, your food, any fixes you might need, so you're going to need more pitches. That pitch is specific to, say, a conservation angle. You've got to start pitching around for more angles. So perhaps you know an editor at another magazine, for example, Action Asia. He might take a slightly more sort of travel angle, perhaps. See if you can get some more work out of him. I used to do a lot of work with Time magazine. They often take these little nibs. Maybe they'll take a short nib about a travel angle again, or perhaps an ecotourism angle or a conservation angle. Again, get to know the sections of all these different magazines and pitch the relevant story. Again, maybe a newspaper in the UK, perhaps the travel section of The Guardian, they might take one of those quirky little stories, those kind of 24 hours in a capital city kind of thing, or things to do when you're in Phnom Penh, things like that. Look at the magazines, look at the newspaper sections, figure out pitches that are going to fit those sections for the editor. In addition, maybe more locally, South China Morning Post, I used to write a lot for them. Look at them. What do they do in features? What do they do in travel? Where can this story possibly fit in? What angle is there? Is there a news angle? Is there a tourism angle? Think about what your angles could be. And what about that conservationist? She's from Scotland, isn't she? Well, maybe a magazine like Scotland Magazine or Scottish Field might take a profile piece on a Scot in the middle of nowhere in eastern Cambodia. Think about all the different angles. Don't just go and do a story with one commission. You need more than one, unless you're writing for the New Yorker or Bon Appetit or Gourmet Magazine or somebody like that paid $2 or more a word and all your expenses. You need more than just one commission. And once you've got things sorted out a bit like that, the whole trip starts to stack up a bit better. So a trip like this would have taken me maybe 3 days away, 2 or 3 nights away in Cambodia, all my travel expenses, visas, etc. And then back in Vietnam at the time, it would probably take me another 2 days or so of writing up, editing, possibly pictures might be involved as well. So you're looking at a week's work to cover all of this, and that kind of salary in Vietnam, all those numbers added up there, is probably quite a good little salary, really. And if you can do that a couple of times a month or 3 times a month, even better, it starts to add up. But there's a lot of work involved, a lot of pitching, a lot of writing, a lot of travelling as well, obviously. Okay, moving on to Kigali. Things are completely different, really, for me now. I do very little journalism, really. I do a few pieces for the BBC here and there. I've done photographs for various NGOs, magazines in Germany, all sorts of things, but it's not kind of the constant work I'm looking for all the time. Most of my work is to do with training journalists, lecturing young journalists or wannabe journalists as well, and the odd bit of media consultancy work as well. So I really want to talk just a little bit about the blog I publish in Rwanda. It's called Kigali Wire, and I use mostly free tools to do this. I detail all the tools I use in several websites, and I'm going to give you a link at the end of this presentation so you can note down the link and go and look at all the stuff I do and kind of, learn a bit from there, hopefully, because I hope it is a bit of a template for young journalists who want to publish online but maybe don't know exactly how to do it. Hopefully this will help you. So firstly, the tools I use a whole ton of them, but there are a number of key ones. I'm going to talk you through some of those now. The first one is Google Reader. Google Reader allows you to aggregate RSS feeds in one place. So rather than going out to check 10, 15, 20, 30 websites every morning for news, you set up Google Reader for the news you want to come to you. So it's a very simple way of keeping on top of your beat in one place. It's the first website I open up every single morning. It's the first website I look at on my phone if I'm out and about and not actually at my desk. So if you don't know anything about RSS and anything about Google Reader, go and learn and get set up. It will save you huge amounts of time. Twitter and TweetDeck are invaluable. Twitter we probably all know about, but it's hugely useful for getting a bit of a name for yourself where you live, with contacting other people who are interested in Rwanda and indeed living in Rwanda. And also, what I found over time is that people come to me with stories because I'm very visible on Twitter in Rwanda, publishing news about Rwanda, discussing Rwanda, and breaking news, etc., things like that. TweetDeck is an application you can download for free. It sits on your desktop or your iPhone or your iPad, and it's, again, very, very useful for monitoring breaking news, monitoring places where you live. So, for example, I have a whole series of columns on my TweetDeck for Rwanda, for Kigali, for Kagame, and other keywords associated with Rwanda that allow me to keep on top of the news from where I live. WordPress is a blogging tool. If you're new to blogs, there are a whole number of tools you can use, but WordPress, I think, is probably the best. WordPress.com is free to sign up. I don't use WordPress.com, I use WordPress.org, which is slightly more complicated to configure. You've got to buy some web space, but I think because you can personalize it in so many different ways, I think it's far more useful to get WordPress.org, buy a bit of web space, host it on your own, buy a template that makes your website look quite professional. I really recommend graph paper press templates, especially if you're doing photography and multimedia stuff. They're really, really good support. They look fantastic, and they only cost, $49 or less, I think. So have a look at that. WordPress and graph paper press is the template I use. Another tool I use is Digo. Digo is a social bookmarking tool. I also use a tool called Delicious, which is also fantastic. But I'm finding Digo far more interesting. So go to digo.com, explore what it can do. What I do with it is I save all interesting news items with a link into Digo, and I use that as a news wire going straight into my blog. So effectively, you're storing an archive of news in one place, and then you're portioning off the most recent bits of it as a newswire directly into your blog. Hugely useful for research and hugely useful for creating a newswire. Flickr I use to store images, basically. A lot of people are starting to come to me now to buy images or actually commission me to go and do work. So, for example, I've done a whole load of NGOs, just done Amnesty International recently, and again, they've all found me from Flickr. So these are images I put up online for free, basically, as long as if anybody uses them, they have to, for non-commercial purposes, they have to credit me as the source. PixelPipe is a fantastic tool. You can use it on the iPhone or on the desktop. It allows you to wire up all your different social media and other outlets in a single place, meaning that I can upload a photo through PixelPipe to 50 different places simultaneously. So I'm not hanging around, going to tons of different websites. Just do it in one place. Really, really useful distribution tool. Highly recommend you have a look at that. Okay, 3 rules. 3 rules for working abroad, things I've learned over the years, I guess. The first one is, whatever you do, go somewhere cheap. And the odder the place, the odder the better, basically. If you go somewhere odd, where nobody is, somewhere out of the way, and you're reasonably visible, people are going to come and find you, and people are going to come and offer you work. I can't really list the amount of people who have come to meet me in Kigali, got in touch with me in some way, purely because of my blog, from politicians, diplomats, journalists, famous authors, all sorts of people connect with me literally on a weekly basis because of the blog. So if you're stuck in Paris or London, then it's not that odd, and really, frankly, nobody really gives a damn about you. But if you're stuck out in Rwanda or Congo or Mali or somewhere, and you're a foreigner and you're looking into stories, you're going to be discovered if you make yourself visible and be transparent about who you are as well. Second point, read a lot. I think I read a ton of books before I moved to Rwanda, but I only had about 2 months' notice before I went. And then I probably spent the next 6 months reading books and newspapers every single day. And I think it's probably the most important thing to do before you can have an opinion on anything. You've got to read, you've got to talk to people, you've got to know stuff. I was actually invited to do a BBC radio thing after I'd moved to Rwanda. I think I'd lived in Rwanda for 3 weeks, and I said, no way, I've only been here for 3 weeks. What the hell do I know? I'm too busy buying washing machines and trying to sort out the crappy internet. So don't kind of arrive in a foreign country and start thinking you can give your opinions, because that's kind of the old way, if you like, stepping off the plane and spouting off with the AP wire in your ear back to London. That's the old way, and it never worked, and it certainly doesn't work in the digital age. So read and learn as much as you can. Talk to everybody you possibly can. The more you read, the more you know, and don't stop reading. Okay, the third point is quite a simple point. I'm not going to read it out. You can read it there. But basically, talk to people. As I've just said, talk to people, link to people, file to outlets. It doesn't matter who it is. It could be Twitter. It could be the New Yorker. It could be the Daily Telegraph. Whoever. Have something to say. Have someone to talk to, and file somewhere every single day. You have to be the person on the ground that's always on the beat, or always on the job, effectively. So there you are. I think you're all set up now. You've got your little laptop, you've got your blog set up, and you're ready to get starting, to get publishing. Well, I think you should just take your time a bit. Just out of experience, you don't have to listen to me, but I think if you just take a bit of time to think about what you want to do. So, why do you want to go to this place? You've got this idea that you want to go and live in Hanoi, I don't know. Why? What do you want to do there? Who do you know there? Why? What's the drive to get there? What's going to keep you there when you get there as well? Why are you interested in this place? Everywhere I've lived in, it's always been always been a real core drive to actually going there, and through the hard times, it's kind of kept me there as well, because you will have hard times. And so really think carefully about why you want to go to the place you want to go to. Also, what do you want to do online? Do you want to focus on photography? Is it text? Is it audio? Is it video? What is it? nail it down on paper, think about it very carefully and plan. Don't just come up with, your new blog. It's Dick in Delhi or whatever it is. Dick in Delhi might be fantastic at the moment, but when Dick decides to move to Rio de Janeiro, it's not going to look that cool, is it? So really think about how you're going to present yourself. I think before I started my first blog, I probably thought about it for 6 months, which is probably too long. But anyway, I thought carefully about the name. I ended up with Noodle Pie. It sounded kind of cool, but it made kind of sense as well. Noodles east, pies west. Noodle Pie, east meets west, and it kind of stuck with me. The Kigali Wire thing is obviously very specific to Rwanda, which is fine because I can't publish things about Rwanda when I leave Rwanda in a year or two or so. That will have to change, and I don't think you should necessarily keep writing about Vietnam when you've left Vietnam a year or two ago. It's kind of sad, and it shouldn't really work. But the point is, think about what you want to do and what will work for you. And then think about how you're going to do it. So I've mentioned a few of the tools I use, but they might not be the ones that work best where you're going to go. If you're going to Brazil, for example, people don't really use Facebook in Brazil. If you're interested in Facebook, they all use Orkut. If you're going to Russia, they're all over LiveJournal. If you're going to, I don't know, maybe in Vietnam, I think they used to be on Yahoo, My Yahoo. That's all gone now. So I think that actually, no, Facebook's been locked down there, so I'm not sure what they're into. But it's your job. Research what's popular, where you're going to go. Also, what is best what are the best publishing methods? What are the best tools to help you publish your stuff wherever it is you're going to go? Photographs again. Maybe it's Flickr, maybe it's not. Research. Next, plan your ass off. Absolutely. Get the pen and paper out. I'm absolutely useless with programs that you download to create these graphs and all that sort of stuff. So I literally just get a pen and paper, and I've got this idea in my head that things should work in a certain way, and I plan it out that way. That's what I did back well before I moved to Rwanda. Actually, it was when I was working with the Frontline Club. I worked on all of this stuff and for the BBC. So if you're the kind of person who needs to see things visually, get a pen and paper out. It really helped me, and maybe it'll help you too. Okay, finally then, 5 secrets of doing journalism abroad. 5 things that probably don't get talked about an awful lot. Firstly, opportunities. You turn up in a foreign place, as I've mentioned previously, in an odd place, and you start networking, you meet people, you keep a blog, you start tweeting. People are going to find you, not only from overseas, but in the country itself. Just by talking to people, you'll find, by being a foreigner and being reasonably qualified to do something, able to write, possibly have a journalistic record, maybe, you'll be offered jobs editing newsletters for NGOs, editing local magazines, sub-editing local newspapers. I've been offered that in Vietnam, sub-editor of Vietnam News, editor of Time Out magazine in Vietnam. I never did them, but I was offered them. In Rwanda, I've been offered tons of opportunities. I've actually listed them on one of the links that you'll be taken to at the end of this presentation. But make yourself known, be transparent about who you are, be public about who you are online, and if you're reasonably good, you will get opportunities. No doubt about it, you will get opportunities. Secondly, blogs. One of the questions I'm always asked when I lecture university students in the UK is, how much traffic do you get? What's the business model? Etc., etc. Well, the traffic side of the question, just forget about that straight away. The traffic is not important. It's more about the connections you're going to make on your blog, on Twitter, on Flickr, or wherever it is. It's about the quality of the connections. I'd even go as far as to say, the less traffic you have, as long as it's not, zero, as long as it's reasonably steady, the better the audience, because using a tool like StatCounter, and that's a visualization of StatCounter behind Kigali Wire there, you can very quickly tell not only how many people are coming, but who they are, where they're coming from, which government departments, which news agencies, where else, departments of defence, consulting companies, who else is all over my blog, JP Morgan Chase. There's all sorts of people that very oddly seem to come to your site every day. The less visitors you have, the easier it is to see who they are, when they come, and then try to figure out why they're coming. Very useful. So don't be hung up on tons and tons of traffic. It's not really that important. And let's face it, you start a blog in Rwanda, I mean, how many people are really going to come and see you? I mean, come on, not that many, really. Next big secret. Well, this is to do with big media. Now, big media really, really want to be like you. Big media would actually like to be a blogger, really, stuck somewhere like me in Rwanda. Because, well, you can change on a dime. If big media wants to add a Facebook like page to their news items on their website, have you any idea how many meetings, how many directives, policy initiatives, reviews, stages of development, blah, 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 that they have to go through? It's huge. You decide how to do it. You do it in 2 minutes, and that's it. Job done. You can get on to the next thing. You can change on a dime, and big media is really jealous of you. This is true. And the other thing is that because you're doing all of this, big media, and if you do it well, they kind of want to be associated with you because you make them look a little bit cool. So carry on doing what you're doing. Do it really well. They'll come calling for you because they want to be associated with you, because they can't drive as fast as you. Simple as that. Now, another dirty secret is you're the big shot in Rwanda. Everybody wants to know you. Everybody wants to connect with you, offer you work. Great. You move back to London. Who are you? You're nobody. You move back to Paris, New York, you're nobody. You're only someone because of where you are and you're reasonably good at what you do. That's it. Get used to it because it's not going to change. It's very important that you are in an odd place. Talk to Rob Crilly, talk to Iona Craig, talk to any number of correspondents you'll find on Twitter. Lovely people. I'm not saying they'll be nobody wherever they go, but it's very important because you are important because you are where you are. And remember that, and don't get too big for your boots, basically. All right, well, that's just about it. There's the link there, by the way, to a Tumblr blog I set up, which is just got a list of links with there's a presentation there. There's a little video. There's all sorts of links to the blogs, and probably the most interesting one for you in this presentation is probably the Kigali Wire, the Kigali Backwire, sorry, which lists all of the processes I went through in setting up the blog and all of the other related stuff. So obviously I can't be there to answer any questions. Please, by all means, have a look at the Tumblr there. My email address is also there, graham.holiday@gmail.com, and if you want to find me on Twitter, it's at NoodlePie or at Kigali Wire, which is the Newswire as well. I probably missed tons of stuff, but I'm sorry, I'm stuck in the red room above the events room in the Frontline Club, and I'm gagging on a pint because it's Friday night, and then I've got to pack and go to Rwanda. So hope that was useful. Thanks very much for coming, and please get in touch. Bye for now.
So, a full and comprehensive, fascinating account from Graham about how to make a living as a foreign correspondent in an odd, difficult, but not necessarily hostile environment. Kitty, on the other hand, has just come back from Libya. She spent a lot of time working as a kind of a one-woman band, as a freelance, often for Sky. What's your experience, Kitty?
Well, quite different, really. I'm going to talk to you about my work as a video journalist, which is very TV news specific and quite different from what we've heard. I'm going to refer quite a bit to the realities of the on the ground. I work mostly internationally, and what I do involves not so much multimedia as multitasking. I work alone. I don't tweet. I'm busy delivering a product for the news. I report, I write, I shoot, I edit TV news packages and features. I also go in front of the camera for lives. And unlike Graham, I do stop. I get a phone call, I get on the plane, I get off the plane, I go to work. There's no 2 weeks involved buying washing machines. It all has to be done very quickly. So why work this way? Well, it's cost effective, and I can do alone what normally involves a team of 2 or 3, and it works. I've recently been out in Libya providing full 24-hour news coverage for Channel News Asia. I've also freelanced for Sky News, as you mentioned, from all corners of the world as an individual, and with their help I've built up skills and equipment over the years which enables me to do this. But I don't want to give any illusions here. This is a tough business, no more so than today, and just because you're multi-skilled doesn't mean there's a huge demand for your talents, unfortunately. I'll try and highlight some of the reasons why I think that is. The description of tonight, there's a line, the days of the foreign press pack who parachute in for the big story are numbered. I don't agree. This is definitely not always the case, in particular for TV news reporting, in my experience. Take Libya, for example. The first month or so of the conflict, every news organisation you've ever heard of, and even those you've never heard of, were there. And there were very few gaps there in the market for independents like myself. Here is my Benghazi Rebel Press accreditation. It's number 668. That was before the NATO airstrikes began and the world's media pack arrived. I don't know how many more showed up to cover that story in the end, but it must be thousands. And it doesn't leave much room for individuals to work. Also this year, as you know, there have been more obstacles than ever before for all journalists, but in particular for independents. Covering the uprisings in the Middle East has been challenging at best, impossible at worst. The 2 biggest foreign stories playing out right now, Syria and Yemen, are virtual no-go zones for media, myself included. And even countries which were accessible weren't easily workable for individuals. I didn't go to Egypt, for example, not because I wasn't fascinated by the story, I was, but because I didn't think it was worth the risk. Countless crews working in Cairo back in January had cameras seized, more did than not. A large network, yeah, you can perhaps cope with losing your kit, but it's catastrophic for an independent if it's your own gear, and the chances are you have to replace it yourself. Personally, I can't easily afford that, so Egypt, for me as an independent, was a no-go. Of course, it's challenging for all journalists to work in these conditions, but if you're alone, I personally think you need to weigh these risks even more carefully. Scenarios like the Egyptian revolution deter at least me from the usual get-up-and-go freelance-style news gathering that we love to do. I also think there is sometimes reluctance amongst news editors to commission freelancers on dangerous assignments. Recent events seem to have heightened this resolve. Editors, I have to say, are not doing this necessarily out of concern for our health and well-being. They simply don't want to take the hit when it comes to insurance and liability. Other broadcasters expect you to magically show up somewhere, regardless of the obstacles, and be available for them as their correspondents, but they won't take responsibility for you getting there or being there. I had to be quite tough with people when I was working in Libya. I said, if you're not going to cough up for expenses and take responsibility, I won't work for you, because it's too expensive and too dangerous to be there. And I was lucky to be working for an organisation which took care of these matters. Another thing that was in the description of tonight's discussion, new opportunities are emerging for a new type of foreign correspondent. Yes, in theory, but in practice, I don't think this is how things are working. I'd say that opportunities are still few and far between, and you have to fight for them. You can help create chances, as we've just heard, going out as a stringer onto an international story. It's worked for many people, including myself. But you have to remember that these cutbacks, which are being made, are there because budgets are tight. And even a multimedia freelance costs some money, well, at least we hope we cost some money. There are better chances with smaller news organisations which don't otherwise have the resources to send to major international stories. But back to this question, will they be able to take care of you properly in an emergency in a conflict zone? Now, broadcasters love to plead poverty, but when it comes to the crunch, TV News spends big bucks on sending big names to big stories. This, of course, is different if you're a writer or a photographer. But there's not much left for people like us who like to go it alone. It's also hard to attract interest in a story which is not in the headlines. There are fewer crews in Libya now, so yes, you think there might be more opportunities for an independent. But there's also far less interest in the story, and there's also certain fatigue, I think, over Libya at the moment. And generally speaking, in my experience, opportunities mainly arise if you're working on a story which is on the news editor's radar. And unfortunately, most of the time, the mindset can be, maybe not for Channel 4, the mindset can be that if it's not in the papers, it may as well not be happening. Of course, what we love to do is to go after stories which aren't on the radar, but it's not easy. And if we don't have something very special to offer, no one listens. It helps to be in the right place at the right time, of course, and to have exclusive access to somewhere or somebody. And I realise that Channel 4 does more than its fair share of independent commissioning, which is great. I do write to Ben sometimes. He writes nice, polite emails back. Has he taken any of my stories? Not yet. Although I've managed to sneak in. I managed to sneak in my footage a few times, which was offered to him via NGOs who I often shoot for. So, but hey, he's got his standards to keep, and hopefully I'll meet them one day. Hey, Ben. But Channel 4 are great, and probably one of the best channels in terms of commissioning freelance work. And Ben's very nice.
Thanks. You needed to say that. You really did need to say that, didn't you?
As for reporting on the ground, credibility, relationships with news organisations are vital, and to that you presumably need to demonstrate a certain level of skill and know the right people, as has been mentioned here. Working alone as a video journalist can create some bizarre scenarios. If you operate your own live shots, like I do, be prepared to get some very funny looks. People are used to news crews, but a reporter talking to herself in the street, for example, in the middle of Osh, Kyrgyzstan, a bit weird. Even more strange if you're alone and you don't know the language. Explain to people what you're doing with a beaker and a camera and a laptop in the middle of the road by yourself. You also have no backup in an emergency. You can be pretty exposed in situations when all your kit is laid out. As I found when a rocket attack came in as I began to film piece to camera in Libya, my fixer was miles down the road in seconds without looking back to help me with the kit. I had to leave it behind and run for cover. Thankfully, we retrieved it later. Apart from these odd moments, there are clear advantages and disadvantages of multitasking, of going it alone. As a disadvantage, when you do it all yourself, you're less likely to become a specialist in any one thing. For example, I can edit fine, but there are people that can put packages together. You can't even see their hands move, and I can't do that. It takes longer. It's hard to get around that one. In Benghazi, I'd walk past the BBC edit room, just a few doors down from my room, and I'd see Orla Guerin putting together a package for the 6 o'clock news in a couple of hours. And I was sort of sweating it late into the night. It's fine if you're a team, you can do it, but on your own, things just take longer. For example, I often find myself juggling editing to a deadline while dealing with tomorrow's production issues. And if you're on your own, there are no shortcuts. There's no one else to help. You just need to put in the hours. Another disadvantage, you have a lot less influence if you're trying to secure a high-profile interview. You're a nobody working for a nobody organisation. Who are you? Why do you want the interview? On the plus side, it's an extremely satisfying creative process when you've done everything from start to finish. You've shot your piece, you've written it, you've edited it. It's fantastic. I wouldn't change that for the world. Your costs are lower. You can spend more time on stories. You have that luxury. You have a greater intimacy in certain situations than with a full crew, which I think, personally speaking, is very valuable. You're low-key. It's easier to operate under the radar. I've smuggled my BGAN past the Egyptian authorities twice now, which I believe is almost a record, because most people seem to get them taken off them at customs. As for working relationships with broadcasters, well, I can only speak from my own experience, but over the years, Sky News has given me some fantastic opportunities as freelance, far beyond what I could ever have imagined. I mean, they literally found me on the streets of Kabul, gave me the safety course, the training, freelance work in London as well. But I realise there's only so much I can do for them, and they do want to focus on their top correspondents more so than ever these days. And I don't think there are the opportunities now at Sky that I perhaps once had. And also, if you're on screen, you can't switch between channels very easily. I couldn't work for Sky one day, BBC the next, and Al Jazeera the day after, although I do filming jobs which are obviously neutral. The realities of going it alone, I'll whiz through these and we can follow up if anyone's interested. For me, top of the list, costs. You can't go anywhere or do any independent reporting without cash. Conflict and crisis is expensive to cover. If you're an independent journalist, the chances are you spend a lot of time waiting for people to pay up. As for getting any help from the bank, forget about it, you're freelance. So unless you have your own wealth, one of the main challenges is managing a budget. It's key to maintaining your independence if you're going alone. Freelancers often have to cover their own expenses, as we've heard. Why is it a factor? Let's go back to Benghazi. On a budget, my costs were about $7,000 for a month, including the travel to and from the UK. And that's even with saving here and there by sharing drivers and fixers occasionally. When news organisations hire freelance multimedia, they want it to be cost effective. It's one of the advantages. They're not expecting you to run up a massive bill. But especially in a conflict zone, there's only so low you can go on price without compromising safety and quality. Equipment, we can go into this more later if people are interested. I believe it's important to be self-sufficient as well as maintaining professional standards. For TV, that means investment. My favourite bit of kit is my BGAN, because it means I can file from absolutely anywhere.
Everyone knows what a BGAN is, don't you? No. Can you explain briefly what a BGAN is?
Well, basically, it allows me to have a satellite connection to the internet, so I can FTP files. I can also do live.
What does FTP mean?
File transfer process. I think people know what FTP is.
Do they? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can send my packages back to the UK or wherever I'm sending them to. I can also do live streaming for live hits. And just to my final point, we've also heard about contacts. I'd include that on my list. Visas and accreditation, essential to foreign reporting, much harder to get as an independent. Safety, we've touched on this already. Broadcasters have serious concerns. They don't want to encourage freelancers to risk their lives, but could we strike a better balance there is a question I would have to ask. And insurance is a big stumbling block for many of us. There is insurance available now, I understand, through GRN. It costs up to £1,000 a week for Libya, so that's a tricky issue. How do I do it? Well, just to sum up, you have to want this badly. You have to believe in it. You have to be in this not for fame or fortune, because you won't find either one unless you're very lucky. You need a real passion and a genuine interest, and drives you, maybe a bit bonkers as well. But at the end of the day, we have unique opportunities to get unique access and make some very special stories, and I personally say it's worth it.
Kitty, thank you very much. Now, I was going to go to Rosie next, but actually I think there's a few answers required from Ben. So Ben, while Vaughan gets his BGAN out, and don't worry, it's polite.
That's BGAN.
He's got a baby one.
Baby BGAN.
And you can detach it, and you've got lots of cables, and that will give you a satellite connection that you can send video on.
Where do you get it from? How much does it cost?
Couple of $1,000s. The problem isn't the actual cost of the unit, it's the cost of actually sending anything. Unless you're a large broadcaster and get discounted rates, well, if you're a worker broadcaster, you don't even think about it, but then it could cost you $4 or $5 a minute, or I don't know, it's expensive. It can cost you £40, £50 to send a short film easily. Mind you, cheaper than a satellite feed.
Thanks, Vaughan. Ben, pick up some of those points.
Well, first of all, I want to say Kitty Logan is an amazing journalist who has sold herself slavishly to Sky News over the years, so I've not been able to use her. But I'm definitely embedded in my head now, so I'm going to use Kitty, so she shouldn't attack me publicly again.
That was nice to you.
Kitty works for Sky News, and there's a big difference between us and Sky News, and that is we have 1 hour a day, if we're lucky, Channel 4 News, and Sky have 24 hours to fill, and we need to push the talent we have as much as we can. And that's people like Lindsay Hilsum, Jon Snow, and we very rarely use freelancers. When I say very rarely, I mean it's part of our remit to use freelancers as much as possible, but they really have to have unique selling points. and there are three things really that come in there. The first is being in the right place at the right time, and I see James Brabazon at the back of the room, and he was in this is in a different era before. Well, it was not before the internet, but before BGANs and almost, but before BGANs and Twitter and everything else. He was in Liberia for a long time, and had he been there now with today's technology, we would have hired him at the drop of a hat, because he would have been the only person on the side of an unbelievable war that we could have contacted.
Isn't that how Lindsay Hilton got back into the business?
Yes,
because she was in
Rwanda.
In Rwanda at the right time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, that's the first thing. The second thing is a big exclusive, and I see Sam Farmer standing next to him. He when I first started at Channel 4 News, he got an interview with Joseph Kony, who was the leader of the Lord's Resistance Army. No one else has spoken to him since. And we thought long and hard about buying that, but we were outbidded. But that's a real. I mean, that's what I mean for Channel 4 News. I'm just explaining that rather than BBC or Sky, because we don't have a continual news service. And the third thing is something that's unforgettable, and we tend at the moment to concentrate on people who can get us access to stories that no one else can. And that doesn't mean, I mean, since Libya has started, I've been inundated with emails and phone calls from people who are in eastern Libya. I don't know any of these people. They've never contacted me before. They contact me out of the blue. It's extremely dangerous there. And there's absolutely no way I'm going to commission someone who's in that place. I mean, I commission Kitty, or I will do, I promise. But you can't just call out of the blue and say, hey, I'm in eastern Libya, there's loads of gunfire going on, it's really dangerous, because I know that, and that's what keeps me awake at night. I'm not going to commission someone I don't know. So the unforgettable aspect is we have a range of freelancers, and they include people that we know and trust, but they are from the countries from which they're reporting. We have a guy called Mehran Bazognia, who he's Iranian actually, but he goes to Afghanistan for us a lot. He's been going there for 6-7 years for us, and he's embedded with drug dealers. He's embedded with the Taliban. He's done stuff that is absolutely extraordinary and is very, very frightening. But we hire him because we trust him. We have Inigo Gilmore, who's a completely different kettle of fish, larger than life character, but he's very passionate about what he does, and he has delivered on a number of stories. But more recently, we've got a guy called Jamal Osman, who's a British Somali guy who's done a series of films in Somalia and got access to places that, I mean, looking around the room, no one in this room could get access to. So there is a remit at Channel 4 that we need to hire independents, but the independents we go back to are people who can get us to places that no one else can get to, and often, if you're British, especially post 9/11, and the stories are fundamentally conflict stories or stories about the war on terror or places like Somalia, it's very, very hard for you to get there. And it takes us, and Stu Bryan there is ITN's in the pink shirt and the glasses, is ITN's head of safety and security, and we spend an enormous amount of time going through with these people. That's not to say that you can't go somewhere and be commissioned, but it sort of raises the bar for Channel 4 News, because it has to be somewhere where something's happening and no one else is, or it's something that's going to be absolutely unforgettable. And those stories for us are driven by character and access and just passion, really. People really want to tell a story that no one else is going to tell. I mean, I was amazed by that presentation and really frightened as well. I mean, that guy is incredible. He gets up and he has a shower and starts tweeting. And then he goes on to
he does, yeah.
WordPress, Digo, Flickr I've heard of, Pixel Pipe, sorry. That's amazing, and I think for people starting out, the opportunity to broadcast, or not broadcast, but to get your stuff out there is unprecedented. Whether you can get people to pay for it is a different matter. And I was interested in his his graph sort of went from 500 to 3,000, and the quality of the people he is attracting was very important to him. But so it's about, I first started at Sky News and I was a runner, and there was an overnight foreign editor who used to drink quite a lot and used to sleep behind the editing machines. And
Fine tradition. It's a fine tradition.
It is. And he got me to fill in for him. So when I was a 24-year-old graduate working at Sky News out in Osterley, I used to have to man the phones when the Bosnian War was going on. I'd never been anywhere. But this is the difference. In those days, to communicate back to London, you were very, very lucky if you had a sat phone. And the sat phone, as Vaughan will probably remember, weighed half a ton or something. It was absolutely ridiculous. And this guy used to get pissed, go to sleep, and then he'd say, "Ben, you just sit and mind the desk, it'll be fine." And I remember there was an old foreign correspondent called Arnout van Linden, and one time he called from a place called Behatch, and he called and said, he called out and said, hello, it's Wallace there. I said, no, it's Ben. He said, who are you? I said, I'm the run. He said, what the fuck are you doing answering the phone? And then he said, I'm in the middle of a tank attack here, what's going on? I've only got 5 minutes booked on the sat phone, how the hell can I do this? And I said, I'll just go and find Wallace. I went off to find Wallace, couldn't find him, came back 10 minutes later. He was still on the phone going, I'm going to fucking kill you. And these days, I mean, it's amazing, but this guy lives in Rwanda. And he says he goes out in the morning and he looks on his on his phone to see what's going on. I mean, when I went to Rwanda, there wasn't a mobile network. He can place himself at the centre of the world by being in a very remote place, which is a wonderful thing. But I just think it gives you a great opportunity to get your stories out there. But I think your stories have still got to be really, really good.
So it's about the content.
It's about content, yeah.
Thank you, Ben. So, Rosie, I think 2 questions there. The impact of social media and also safety as well. I mean, that's what's driven you to write this.
Yeah.
How important is safety?
Well, when I started, when I was 21, 20, and I was travelling around at university, I remember going to the Vietnam War Museum and having a look at all of those dead journalists on the wall, and thinking in an awful way how sort of romantic and brilliant that all was. That there were about 67 people up on that wall, and that was over a period of 20 years. And in Iraq, there were 120 people killed in 3 years, according to the CPJ, the Committee for Protection of Journalists. And this year there's been 19 people killed, another one today, makes it 20, a Pakistani journalist working for an Italian wire over in Pakistan. I think the safety is an increasing problem because we've all become targets, and there are more of us than there were before, I think, and there are more people who maybe think they're journalists and think that they have the ability to be in the dangerous places and earn the money that they imagine can be earned from social media, and make a name for themselves and perhaps get into the big media, as it was being called earlier, that way. But I think that there's a lot of thinking that needs to go on before you can assume that kind of thing. I mean, I started at the age of 22 over in Iraq. I knew nothing. I really knew nothing at all. Turned up, had read one book by Dilip Hero on Iraq, which was out of date, and a lot of articles at the time, and went about trying to work for the Baghdad Bulletin, which was an independent newspaper that no one had heard of, no one liked unless they saw a story in it, in which case they ripped it out of there and took it for themselves and went off and made a lot of money out of it, and we never made any money at all. I got a job with Reuters through selling a photo for just $50 of a tank only 3 sort of car lengths away from me that had been shot at, blown up in front of my eyes, and all of the people were being dragged, all the soldiers being dragged out by the local community. And I felt I took a great risk in going and taking those photos, having seen that incident, and all I was getting was $50 at the end of the day. And I managed to get myself a job for $10 a day, and doing essentially, I suppose, what was those days' version of social media, which was calling up the wires 20 times a day with my one or two lines that I had to tell people. I, in those days, was taking loads and loads of risks. I was told by somebody right at the beginning, I think quite an irresponsible journalist, on one of my first forays into the bar at one of the famous hotels in Baghdad, always say yes to everything, Rosie, always say yes to everything, which I did at my great, and almost killed myself and several other people along with me. I remember one particular incident where I had the father of the family I was staying with, had been forced to stay with for a month because there were big riots going on around Basra, and I couldn't find a safe place to stay, and I had no money, and it was all a bit of a disaster. But the nice man who had taken me in was driving the car. A friend of mine who now also works for Al Jazeera was next to me, and all I wanted was this one interview, and I was told always say yes. So I went towards this riot that was happening at a crossroads, and I thought, there's cars going through there all the time, what's the problem with that? I forgot that I was looking the way I did, and I forgot that I had no experience whatsoever. So we stopped at the side of the road. A man puts 2 grenades onto the side of the car and starts shouting at us. And luckily my friend had the presence of mind to hit the car door and hit him away. But it was a pretty risky and stupid thing to do. I spent the last year speaking to about 150 people, 68 of them are in this book, trying to work out what all of their amazing advice was. It's a bit like having a panel like this, but 150 people big, trying to find out what their grand advice was and all of their stupid stories from mistakes they made as well. And I would say broadly the big lesson that I discovered, and I might be wrong and I'm sure there are many other lessons, is that you have to stay very, very local, and in order to stay local you have to do as many preparations as possible and making as many of those contacts as he was talking about as possible, and that will put you in the best possible circumstance for being safe. And if a local person says to you, I'm not sure you should go there, never think that you're above it, which it's often been my experience that foreign journalists can come in and think, well, you think it's dangerous, but they'll never arrest me because I'm who I am. But actually you're nobody, and it's a very dangerous thing to be doing.
So do you think mainstream media organisations, you work for Al Jazeera, take their responsibilities seriously? Do you think the ante is being upped to get the story more? Journalists, both staff and freelance, are being put under more pressure to take more risks to get the story?
I think that I work now in the newsroom over at Al Jazeera. I'm not out on the front line all the time. So from my experience, which is mainly from that end of things, I'd say I get about 3 people a day that I am asked to go out and commission with, who are directly from social media. When I say commission, I mean I take their information and I'm told specifically not to offer them any money unless they ask for it. So be aware of this fact, and this is the general rule at Al Jazeera: if you don't ask for money, you will not be given it, sort of as here you go, a little bit of cash back. The answer is there's more possibilities of getting involved through those systems. But when it comes to safety in the big media, I think there are huge advantages, which is that they can put you on the right courses and they can give you all of the backing you need. On the other hand, it's not always perfect, especially at Al Jazeera, actually, I have to admit. I remember one particular incident where, for instance, I was in a square we were in a car park in Baghdad, and I was working with a correspondent, and this was quite near the beginning of our news organisation set up. We were just making a name for ourselves in Baghdad, and that morning we'd been sniped in the car park, so we sort of thought it was a bit of a no-go area, and was sitting up in the hotel room waiting for a time, and then the news just got too big. There was too much happening, and we had to go down, and that was the only place that we could find where we could get the satellite receiving that we needed to get. And we went down, we did it, we all got kitted up. It took us about 15 minutes to actually set up, another 15 minutes to unset up. We were terrified. Got back in, called the news desk. What do you think? I think her earrings were a bit large, it doesn't really fit in with the whole look. So, there are risks of being involved in these larger media organisations who might not pay that much attention to individuals. It also can get you into trouble. I think this is true at the BBC as well. I was involved in one story where this happened, where other parts of the organisation, something they've done will have a relay effect on you. And so, we had a situation at Al Jazeera where Al Jazeera Arabic had decided to report what turned out to be an untrue story on the rape of a girl by the police force, the Interior Ministry, who were mainly Shia. And so the Al Jazeera went ahead with this, Al Jazeera Arabic, after we'd decided we didn't want to touch the story. And the next day, I was by myself in the hotel because my cameraman and reporter were off doing an embed somewhere, and I heard that our 12 local guys that we use had been kidnapped and taken away. I mean, of course, we were able to put the motions into place that you wouldn't have been able to have if you're an independent out there, but still there are dangers of the larger media organisation.
Excellent. And finally, Vaughan, I mean, in the nicest possible way, Vaughan, you've been around a bit. You've worked in Bosnia, and it feels like there are some parallels to the Libya story in there as well. Has the situation changed for freelancers a lot in that time, do you think?
Yes, I think it's changed a huge amount. I mean, the biggest change for us all is the internet. It's completely impacted on what we do. I mean, it's very hard to try to assess as to whether it's easier or harder now. But I think there are certain differences that might help us look at that. I mean, when I started was about 87, and got together with a group of people who and created an agency. It was one of the, I think it was the first freelance independent video journalism agency called Frontline News. And we picked up the high camera, and it was really about that opportunity where the industry still had apprenticeships. You know, if you wanted to become a cameraman, you actually had to be someone's apprentice. And then the Aussies came.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah. Okay, absolutely. Is this working? Okay, so when we started, there were these apprentices, and then the Australians came and radically impacted it, and then the independents came, and we were really about using this technology, the high. Over 15, 18 years, it was very dangerous. Half of us at Frontline were killed, and it was very difficult. But at the time, what was critical about understanding us at the time was that we really had no option to get our journalism out. We had to have a relationship with the established industry. There was no other way of getting it out. And so fundamentally, that's what's changed. You now can put it on the internet. You can use the internet to develop your own brand and your own identity in a way that's incredibly helpful. And actually, you can, if you get it right, develop a very strong brand. And I think that the way the internet's going, I think we'll see more parity of brands. I mean, you can have a broadcast that has a brand, an individual can do surprisingly well on developing a brand in this extraordinary space. So I think I look back at that, and certainly if we'd had the internet or anything like it, you could put video on, it would have changed the way we operated very significantly. In terms of what happened, there was also another difference, which was the industry then didn't feel the sort of sense of duty of care that it now perhaps has been compelled to feel, and that it's developed for its own people and is trying to lay a template for us, the independent. And I completely understand that, but I am very much on the other side of the coin. I don't want the duty of care as an individual, and I hesitate to say that I don't think there's an independent. You won't find two independents agreeing on much. So that's my view. It doesn't represent anybody. But no, I don't really want the duty of care. I want the work. And when the argument for duty of care is, we can't take responsibility of you, we can't assure you, stops them actually paying me to do a job, that's when I have a problem. But now on the internet, I won't actually get a commission when I go out. I'll go out and I'll talk to people when I'm there. In fact, the last time I had actually anything like commission was with Ben in Afghanistan a year and a half ago. But that, I was already in Afghanistan and I only needed it because otherwise they wouldn't give me accreditation. So, so there are these issues.
You used me.
I used you, and you treated me wonderfully. He really is a nice guy. But no, I mean, what I'm really saying is I don't think we need, in the way we used to rely on the traditional news industry for our work. I think we need to be looking not beyond that, because they're always going to be here, but I think we need to be looking to develop our own brands. And I think that the agency that I ran with my colleagues, why it was really untenable was that we, or in my view, and this is a view that I wasn't completely clear about at the time, was we were unable to secure a credit. And this is obviously different to photographers, and we were really photojournalists with video cameras. But if you can't get a credit, you can't build a reputation. And it would get to the point whereby I would either be selling stuff for somebody, or I'd be trying to sell my own stuff. And people 2 offices down wouldn't necessarily know and I'd done it, because it would just be either part of a news, a clip they'd used, or a story, but I wouldn't be voicing it. And actually, interestingly, one looks at Kitty. I'm wondering quite how many. There weren't really any of you around then, and actually, well, there was Lindsay Hilson, but she wasn't freelance very long. She went into Channel 4, and in a sense, your relationship with Sky perhaps mirrors that. But in a sense, it has changed, because fundamentally, with an industry that is short of funds, again because of the internet, I think there's more flexibility, because ultimately we're jolly good value, but nobody thought we were great value or cared when they had the money. And so you just, that wasn't an argument. They'd still try and not give you very much money for your stuff, but, and often not on the contracts, but, that's yesterday. But fundamentally, I think if I were to give any advice to anybody, for what it's worth, it would be that the credit is just as important as any remuneration you'll get. Because actually, I think in the internet age, when we are able to make as much money as perhaps we can get from the industry, it is that credit that will allow you to do so. And that ability to build trust as an individual and build your own brand. Because I see a future where where that's what's important. I see a future where there's something about the internet that, and I've seen this quite recently because of the Assange thing, where actually you can slander and smear someone incredibly easily because it's all unattributable. And so actually, a large newspaper or a serious brand can be brought down. And so again, it's all trust. An individual could stand up quite well in an internet or a means of communications where actually reputations can be overturned so easily in this unattributable way. So it's quite an interesting thing. So I'm really trying to say that it's there's a future. And when I look at my journalism now, I don't do as much of it, unfortunately. I'd love to, but of course the industry is part of my plan, and it's a central part of it because that's where the money is now. But actually, I'm trying to look beyond it, and I won't relinquish very much in the order of editorial control. And actually, you don't really have to now. If you've got a good story, people will. My experience with Ben was a very easy one. There were no disagreements editorially at all. It was, it was an easy one. It wasn't difficult to get a credit now with Channel 4. But actually, I don't believe I would have got one 10 years ago.
But isn't that a function of the fact that you are who you are, and if you'd been starting out, that it would have been a lot harder?
Look, it may be, and that's impossible for me to answer. And
Ben, can you answer that?
Well, Vaughan was in an extraordinary situation and shot an extraordinary film, and I didn't see why we would want anyone else to tell that story, given that he was there and he lived through it. So I'm definitely advocating that other people fight for it, because actually you're going around in a circle if you don't get it. And actually, if I was to suggest or campaign for one thing on behalf of the Independent, there is a responsibility to give a credit. It is an absolute fundamental one, because otherwise we have our future as individuals is completely undermined. And I think that this is why the agencies the freelance agencies didn't thrive. And they've gone. I mean, Insight, Frontline. A journeyman exists, but actually they're not strong. You look at photography, and there has been a very robust infrastructure to support independence. Arguably the freest part of the free press. And I feel the other thing that I think we need to really value and argue the case for our importance. We're in an industry starved of money, again, internet, that relies on wholesale content. From agencies, and has done for quite a while, and any diversity that we can add is incredibly important.
and valuable, and we need to argue for that value, and we need to sort of push hard. And so, again, if I were to look at this whole duty of care thing, I think it's fascinating. I don't want the duty of care. That's a personal thing, but I'm not arguing for anybody who thinks it's important, of course. But at the same time, for me, it's the work that's important. And I'll always support. I accept there are a lot of independents out there, a lot of people trying. Like we all started, we all managed to get through that point whereby nobody would trust us, and that we'd call the Bens of the age and say, "Look, I've got this great stuff. I'm getting shot at," and had the phone put down. But ultimately we broke through by perseverance, and we took some risks, and there's no other way. There's no route. And when it comes to safety, and I really just want to recommend Rose's book to you, actually, because it's startlingly a good idea. And I have, to the extent that any freelance can, I've argued that when the industry tries to tell us to be safer, to be this, to be insured, it really needs to get its house in order. It sets very little in terms of example, and it's not that it doesn't want to, but fundamentally as an industry, we lack. The capability of valuing the practical, the logistics, because we believe that journalism is an intellectual exercise, because we like it like that, we feel better about it. Well, actually, war journalism it has an important practical component, and actually I think Rose's book, in terms of promoting and trying to give that some interest to people and generating interest in the practical side, serves an incredibly important role, and has done a whole lot more than anybody like me arguing for it will have done. And so I really think it's important, because until people take until we take an interest in what boots we wear or what rucksacks we take, and that might seem a little nerdy, but it's really important. I've seen journalists hire cars, completely unserviceable cars, because they haven't got a clue if they don't know how to put a wheel in a car, and these things then break down when they get shot at. These are important things. So I think it's very important that we promote the practical side of it. But again, I don't think that we need to tolerate, as independents, being lectured. We need to fight for a space. We need to fight for credit. But again, I say that because I feel jolly sure that were I in the industry, I would certainly be having the same concerns that the industry has with safety. And so this is but there is the freelance argument to be made. And what you have to remember, I'm going to shut up, is that the industry. I know I run a club. The industry is a family. Yeah, the industry is a family, and as an independent, if you don't have a desk in the office of a broadcaster, you're always going to be an in-law. But we doesn't mean we can't argue for our credit and build our own paths. So I'll shut up.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. So can I open it out to the floor now? We have quite a varied and interesting audience, I think. So comments, questions, points. At the back.
James Brabazon, freelance TV director and producer. This is primarily a question for Ben, but I'd love everyone else's opinion too. Ben, do you take submissions from freelancers who are not insured? And if not, why not?
It depends where they are. But 90% of the time people are in very dangerous places, and if they're not insured and I don't know them, then no. However, it's a very tricky balance between but yeah, I take lots of submissions from people who are in non-dangerous places, and in fact some of the best stuff we've had on Channel 4 News has been exactly that. It's a tricky balance, and it's a huge responsibility that Steve deals with every day, and I deal with as well. But it depends on
Can you explain maybe to some of the other guys in the audience why that's an important point?
Because you can be contacted by someone who is the only person in, let's say, Misrata. Misrata is a very good example because it's a very hard place to get into, and we've been there now. ITV News has been there, BBC have been there. But to get in and out is very difficult. There are some people in Misrata who I've never heard of, who are probably perfectly good journalists and quite experienced, but I don't know. But they can call me and say, I can go to the Frontline tomorrow and I can get you amazing staff. I know this captain or whatever in the Libyan rebel army really well, and he's going to take me there and I can come back. And you can say, yeah, cool, that's great, we'll commission you. The guy goes off, gets shot, and he is your responsibility. You've never met the guy, you don't know who he is, you don't know what decisions he's taken. So that's the most extreme example, and that's at the front of my head because that's what we're being contacted for every day at the moment.
So it's that act of commissioning gives you a responsibility.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, and to be honest, and now we can insure people to go to the most extraordinary places. We can insure people to go to Somalia. We can insure people to go everywhere. But we have to have sat down over a number of days and had a number of meetings and gone through every single aspect of what we're going to do, and really think about it and calculate the risk. And someone will insure you. But being called cold from out in the field is a completely different thing.
What happens if it's retrospective? If they've done the work, they've got this brilliant thing, and they've come to you, do you then take it? Even though they took 1,000 risks on the way?
That's what I was going to go on to say, but I did avoid. Of course, and that happens all the time.
Yeah, that's difficult, isn't it? We get that all the time at Al Jazeera. We say no, they go and do it, and we're like, God, we weren't supposed to do that.
If someone comes to me and says, I want to go and do this stuff, that's a real rule. If someone comes to me and says, I want to go and do this stuff, and I say, don't do it, and they come back and they've done it, then I don't take it. If someone comes to me, I've never heard from them, and they got this stuff, and it's amazing, then we play it. We don't play it, we edit it.
I mean, for me, being out there as an independent, often in conflict zones, it's a real stumbling block. A lot of editors think just like Ben. They don't want the responsibility, the liability. But you try phoning an insurance company as an individual saying, hi, I'd like to get insured for a trip to Misrata, please, for a couple of weeks. It used to not exist. Now GRN has set up a insurance scheme for freelancers, which is great. But the latest quote I had from them, and correct me if I'm wrong, was £1,000 per week for Libya. Now, for me, that's out of reach. Now, whether Ben would pay that if I rang him up and said, I've got a story from Misrata, I'm not sure. Would you, Ben?
Can you explain GRN?
Global Radio News. It's on their website, the details of their insurance, and there she is. Yeah.
I mean, if you called me and said, I know where Gaddafi's hiding and I'm going to go and see him, and I believed you, then yes, I would. But we'd have to. We couldn't just do it then and there. It would take us a day at least.
Yeah.
And that's the fact. You can. There have been numerous instances which, and they're still ongoing. Some of the legal cases, and they're not. When I say legal cases, they are hugely emotional and extremely painful experiences that news organisations have gone through. These are people who have been hired that you get to know. They die, and no one knows whose responsibility it is. Ultimately, it's the responsibility of the person who was there, or the awful circumstance in which they're in. But you're not, I'm not, I don't sit there, Steve doesn't sit there on a corporate level thinking, oh God, what's it going to cost us? We think, shit, do I trust this person? That's the overwhelming criteria.
I think there's also a myth that freelancers push boundaries more than other journalists might do who are attached to a big network. Personally speaking, call me chicken, I don't do that. I know that I don't have backup. I know I don't have insurance. I don't push the boundaries. I think there was a lot of talk, or some talk, in the wake of the deaths in Misrata of Tim Hetherington and his colleague that maybe, because they're freelance, they're more gung-ho. Personally speaking, I would say that's not the case. I'm very well aware that I'm on my own and I've got to look after myself and no one else is going to do that if I get into trouble. But having said that, I would emphasise the point, it is very difficult to get the backup. It's difficult to get editors to take responsibility, and the insurance is an issue. Although great for GRN who've actually come up with a scheme. Am I right on the figures, by the way?
Yes, you are right. But what GRN is doing now is that she's splitting the Now we are splitting the cost, so we pay half of the insurance and the correspondent pays the other half. That's in case we make sure that the correspondent can get some work. So Libya was a very good example because we insured a correspondent, Yasim Fowden, and we paid half of his insurance. And of course we have a correspondent in Damascus who went inside the country without any insurance, and we insisted on him on paying for insurance. And in that case, we ended up paying for his insurance for about 2 weeks. So I don't encourage any correspondents to go inside any dangerous place without insurance because it's really tricky. And we have lots of examples about people getting injured, like Nelson Rand in Thailand, and what happened to him. He was in Thailand and he wasn't insured, and then he ended up going to Canada and getting treatment, and it's really bad for him because he was freelancing at that time and he wasn't a staffer for the client he was freelancing for. So if you are interested in knowing about the insurance, just contact us and we will try to figure out the way so we can help you. But we cannot help you unless we know that we can get you some work, because we cannot afford it as well, just to pay freelancers insurance because it's very expensive. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, sorry. Go.
Before the question, the one thing I would personally like to see is an opt-out. If the industry feels that it has to have this duty of care, I think I should be able to take responsibility myself. I understand that maybe that can only be applied to people you know, but I would like an opt-out. I'd like to be able to say sign a bit of paper saying I don't want the duty of care. So that I can take the risk myself, but knowingly done so. I mean, part of the problem is it's not often the journalist or his friends; it's often the family who don't even often know what the journalist is doing, the freelancer is doing. So there is a problem, and I think that the broadcasters need some protection. But I'd like to see some sort of opt-out, because ultimately these things have the effect of denying work to freelancers, and I think there needs to be a way where freelancers can work. We have a role.
It's a question from the...
sorry, I've got the mic in here.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Name is Majda Hashim, and I'm now been brought up in Russia and in London. Now I feel much more nervous than I did before, but I'm all set to go to Afghanistan in 2 months' time to stay and work as a journalist, and I'm qualified in here. Got a couple of contacts from here, The Guardian, BBC London, and they've said it's okay for me to work for them, as in that I would just send them work from there and they would just pay me as a freelancer from there. No insurance, too young apparently for it, and because I'm from the country, I speak the language, I look like them, I assumed it would be easy for me to get around and get some stories, and I've got a couple of contacts in there, journalists, editors, producers, a couple of people from Reuters. Is that safe? Is it crazy? What do you think? What's the advice?
Kitty.
I lived in Kabul for 2 years, but they were 2 slightly easier years than we face now. It was 2002, 2004. I started my career there. I went to Kabul knowing nothing and nobody, and I have no clue what I was doing whatsoever. And I had a fantastic and very diverse experience there, working for many different news organisations. It is a different story today. Security is a big issue. You don't have the freedom now that I would have had back then. You do need to be very, very careful operating. I mean, I was lucky enough to travel all over Afghanistan. You can't do that very easily now at all. There's a long list of casualties, as we know, over the past few years: NGOs, media, kidnappings, murders. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of secure guest houses in Kabul. I would advise you to get information about where it's really, really safe to stay. Frontline Club has a link to one of them. So I'd certainly advise to watch out and take good advice for people who are already operating there.
Rosie?
Yeah, I was going to add that it seems like being a freelancer in Afghanistan is perhaps no different to being with a big media. You're all under the same kind of circumstances, and they tend to be bunched in a few different hotels now, right? I mean, there's not very... I wouldn't advise, going out on a limb too much right now, given the safety circumstances. Know that there's a team of you perhaps going. That's always a good idea. Obviously, take good advice from whoever it is locally. Perhaps get 3 different people who you use locally, 3 different tribes, 3 different languages, 3 different points of view. Take all of those opinions. I think as a woman, you've got an advantage in Afghanistan.
Definitely,
in terms
yeah.
of the stories you can get to, and in terms of if you want to hide, it's quite easy to hide. And other than that, that would be my
And just let me add one quick point to that. I mean, my experience of going it alone internationally is that you never really are on your own. As soon as you get to Kabul, you'll realise there's a great expat community there. There'll be other journalists, there'll be other freelancers. They all stick together. You take care of each other, and I think you'll find in Kabul there's a good, solid community that will support you.
Sorry, I want to say. I would go, and for the first month or 6 weeks, don't file anything. Don't arrive and think. Don't arrive and think, wow, I've got to get this. The bomb's gone off somewhere. I've got to rush there. just get to know people, relax, enjoy it. You're completely, you know, Afghanistan is a dangerous place, but it's not. I was going to say it's not the most dangerous place in the world, but is it? I don't know. It probably is. But it's not so dangerous that you're going to die by going there. But you're certainly in a more dangerous situation if you're there as a reporter. But spend a month getting to know people and getting to know the rhythm of the place and what it's like being there and the people.
Actually, I was thinking of that as well, because when I go, there's going to be Ramadan, and I'm really hoping that I wouldn't be running around finding.
No, I mean that's the worst thing you could do is get off the plane and think.
I would advise waiting until after Ramadan. It would be a waste of your time going during Ramadan.
True.
So I've got family in there as well. I just want to get to know them, so I'll go around.
Yeah.
Question here?
I had a question. Everyone over the last couple of minutes has said knowing nothing, you know, a lot about intellectual capacity. And I'm really curious about what is our responsibility as journalists or freelancers now to have a little bit more of an education before we do go to these places. I'm just talking from experience. This is my friend Matt and I. We both go to SOS. We're pursuing master's degrees in different things. So, how is that better to be more informed these days? I mean, I guess that's what we're really curious about, because I study international development. I'm really trying to understand it before I go shoot photographs about it or so on and so forth. And so, what would you say as journalists now? What would you have done like differently? And I know a lot of photographers who went to Oxford or did other quite things, and they do very informed work. And I guess I'm curious about the future of journalism from that standpoint, or as freelancers.
Okay.
Yeah, the guy who lives in Rwanda was saying he read everything. He arrived there and he read more. And I thought that's a great thing to do, but I think you don't really get to know a place by reading about it. And often when I did that myself and went to places when I was younger, you'd read the book, or I mean the classic one is reading The Lonely Planet, and you arrive in some hostel and you get staying and everyone says, well, which bus are you going to take? And you're going to take the train, and it says, I've got the 1989 edition, and it's aging me now. But I think, certainly read and do your research, but you can't beat, like I was saying to the lady over there, you can't beat actually going there and getting to know the place. And I think you get an instinct that way. Often, if you read a really old book about a place, you might know as much as reading a new one. I'm not saying don't read, but I'm just saying you can over-research, and then you think, but he wrote that, he's already done that, and you start thinking, your head is full of everyone else's stories, and you think, I can't do that because it's already been done.
I'll second that. There's only so much you can learn sitting on the couch at home. I'll say it again, contacts. Go out there, talk to people, network. That's when you really learn about the place, is by talking to people. I've covered stories in two different ways. I was, as I mentioned, in Afghanistan for over 2 years, and I've never, I think, reported as well on a story as I have from Kabul, because I knew that place inside out, well, as well as you can understand Afghanistan. I knew that place inside out, I knew everybody, I had all the contacts. But what happened to me is that I then, as we heard in this piece, I got the Kabul label. And even years after I left Afghanistan, people thought I was still there, and they were still ringing up going, are you in Kabul today? I said, no, I left 2 years ago. I've spent a year in Lebanon, similar story. I got to know it, I understood the story. What I'm trying to do now is to go in and out of places on different jobs, and I do feel very ignorant doing that, because I'll get a phone call, often I go the next day, and I've got to arrive and talk about stuff or shoot stuff and tell stories, and it's like, well, I don't know anything, I just got here. So there are two ways of doing this, but nothing beats, as Ben says, going there, talking to people, experiencing it for yourself.
Good word.
One of the important things when I was researching the book is that I got as many people from as many diverse views as possible. So I'm lucky, I work opposite Al Jazeera Arabic, and they've got just the most extraordinary pool of people. And it was interesting because the people on that side, one of the first advice they gave was read the history books. Don't read about today, read about yesterday, because then you're always going to have something to talk to them about that they understand, and it's not going to be the flashpoint of today. the thing that's going to be pissing people off over the dinner table. Actually, if you all talk about the common history that has helped, then from there you can get to know people in a better way. And there's one guy in the book called Laith Mushtaq. He's a fantastic cameraman for us and has met with Bin Laden a number of times. And his big thing was, read history, and never stop reading, because the thing that you read the night before could save your life the next day if you were able to form a common bond with someone.
Excellent. So, question at the back, and maybe one more after that, and then I think we're over time.
Mostly towards Ben. I don't know how to get round the subject of Australia not wanting to be commissioned, not wanting to be covered. I spent 3 years out there getting all the history, the research, the network. I was very involved in the Stolen Generation inquiry, very involved in the black movement out there, had some amazing stories. There's a huge reluctance from the Aborigine community to give their stories because they don't trust. Came back with some amazing stories, great facts. Nobody really wanted to touch it with any doubt. I got to the point where I decided recently to do a drama documentary because it was one of those subjects that still haunted me. In getting back in touch with all of the people I'd done the research with before, I was horrified to find things are worse. And last time I even approached known people to front it up, so the face in front of the camera would be one that people know. They couldn't get things commissioned. This time round, I'm at a loss what to do. I'm disgusted that the British media will not cover this. I was talking to Pilger 2 weeks ago.
We're over time. Can I
put
that to Ben? How do you get that story on air? And then here, one question here.
I mean, Australia is a really tricky one, and I know there's huge connections between here and Australia. And you're talking about the Stolen Generation, the kids who went out to Australia, sorry, like rabbit-proof fence. That.
Way bigger than that. Way
right.
Than that, absolutely far.
Well, I mean, have you ever pitched to us at Channel 4 News?
Yes, 12 years ago.
Right.
I'll be on the phone to you tomorrow.
Okay. Fair enough. I think I've got to say, Australia, Canada, America, instinctively, in myself and other people, you think America, Canada, Australia, they've got the most developed medias, English-speaking medias in the world. If someone calls me with a story from Australia, I think it's very unlikely that I wouldn't have heard of that before. And I've just got to tell you about my gut reaction. I'll always read a story or read a pitch, but someone who's calling me from Congo and they say, they're outside Goma and they've just come across something that no one else has ever seen, I will listen to them more than someone who calls me from Canada or Australia or America, because I think, these are places with sophisticated and long-running media networks, and the stories there will have been reported inside those. Do you understand?
Even Pilger says that Australia will not report on what's happening in Australia.
There was one question just here. And then make this our last one, and we'll wrap up for the evening. It was I think it was this. This chap down here. Sorry, if there are more questions, we'll be around afterwards. So. Do come up and chat afterwards, please.
It's quite a quick one. I don't know if it's a controversial one, but do you think it's a good idea for freelancers or people starting out to get some sort of military experience? Or do you think they shouldn't? I know some guys in the Baghdad Bulletin had some.
I'm going to put that to Vaughan and to Rosie, quickly. Because Vaughan had considerable military experience.
I certainly, having been a soldier, made it a lot easier to understand what was going on a lot of these stories, and gave me an advantage. But the main advantage was probably, I was a little bit more organised with my things. mean, if I stop...
You polished your boots in the morning.
I haven't done that for a long time. But, if I stop, I will charge batteries. I'm kind of... I'm paranoid that my batteries are going to lose a percentage of power. So I don't know, but I wouldn't join the army to become a journalist. That might not be the way to do it.
Rosie had a year, was telling me earlier, she had a year in the army after leaving school.
Yeah, I would say it was very helpful because I knew all of the military type, all of the ranking system. That's very helpful. And knowing that it's probably quite a good idea not to turn up as the smelly, dishevelled journalist every single time, thinking that's kind of cool in Afghanistan, when actually they've been there for 9 months and they look pretty damn smart in the morning. And if you look as smart as they do, that's quite helpful to approach people on a level footing.
Brilliant. That's it. I think we're well over time there. So I'd like to thank Ben, Kitty, Rosie and Vaughan, and thank you all for coming.